start?
Yes.
Ok. Merci. Je vais parler en français. Du coup, j'avais préparé en anglais, mais puisqu'on a la traduction, ça va être plus confortable pour moi. Donc, bonjour à tous.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I've already prepared my presentation in English, but I'm going to finally present in French. I come from IFREMER in France, and this morning I'm going to present a global vision of this work package 7 on social acceptability and governance of aquaculture development in the Mediterranean. We'll take a look at some general considerations, and then we'll present the different actions, work, and results in greater detail. Here we have the contents of my presentation. I'm going to give a very brief introduction, followed by some general objectives of WP7, and then we'll concentrate on how we have addressed these notions of social acceptability. These are very complex notions. And then I'll give some concluding remarks and some general recommendations. By way of introduction, I'd like to say that the history of aquaculture development has been driven by new technology. However, this development has been insufficient, but this is not just a technical issue because there are social questions too. These social questions are associated to the development of aquaculture. And this is because in today's world, we make use of collective resources. There's competition for resources and space. And so therefore, we find ourselves in a context of social conflict. So therefore, we should consider aquaculture as an eco-social system because it conducts economic activity, but we also have to take it into consideration in its wider context. So therefore, we have to widen our focus, and we have to take a systemic and ecosystemic focus. So these notions of social acceptability are key for the development of aquaculture activity in the Mediterranean. If we take a look at the recent trends of the aquaculture production in Europe, I'm going to concentrate on Europe, but here we can see that production has evened out from the beginning of the century. Despite efforts made from institutions and from different policies to promote this section. The European Union has followed a specific strategy to promote and to develop the aquaculture sector. And within the framework of the Mediterranean, within the context of the GFCM, great efforts have been made. However, despite these political efforts and despite this political will, we can see that it's not quite functioning as it should. So let's go back to these social considerations. This is nothing new. Since the concept of sustainability came into play, we have had to take into account these questions of interactions between the ecological, economic, and social components. And we have addressed these three components within the outlines and the guidelines of the integrated coastal zone management. We've taken into account the ecosystem approach, and we have also addressed maritime spatial planning. So within all of these notions of social acceptability, we have to address these social dimensions, and we have to see how these social dimensions are actually addressed in practice. So this has been the main objective of this work package 7 of the MedAID project. How do we address this question of social acceptability within the context of the MedAID project? Well, this is a wide and abstract concept, and it encompasses different matters. For example, we can talk about the acceptability of policies, of projects. Also, we can talk about acceptability of the sector, technology, of the aquaculture products themselves. But this also leads us to discuss the behavior of companies. And then we have to take into consideration this distortion of the perception related to pure communication. And within this context of social acceptability, there are factors of different dimensions of sustainability. We have ecological sustainability, economic and social sustainability too. Because very often we have to modify the messages that we convey about aquaculture production in order to favor social acceptability. We could also take into account social questions such as the quality of employment or interaction with other users of coastal zones. All of this within the context of complexity of social ecological systems leading to an erosion of legitimacy in policy making. This isn't just a question affecting aquaculture. We could also extrapolate this to other environments, to other areas. For example, when we're talking about the expectation of citizens to be involved in the decision-making processes, this also occurs in the building business. So we have to take into account this, the question, the important question of legitimacy in policy making, because it is being questioned at the moment. As I say, the citizens expect to be involved in the decision making. So we have worked on social acceptability in work package 7. We've been working within the private sphere. We've been working on the notion of corporate responsibility. In fact, in the Greek case study, we'll be talking precisely about this corporate responsibility. We'll also be talking about social license, everything that actually affects social acceptability. And then we have the second perspective of social acceptability, and that is the public sphere. This is a social process that leads to the acceptance or rejection of a public decision or a political decision. And this leads us on to the question of coastal zone governance and marine spatial planning or maritime spatial planning. This is where different players compete for the use of collective resources and space. And we have to involve all these stakeholders in the decision making. We have to follow a participatory approach. So previous studies have been conducted on the level of support of aquaculture from the general public, from the citizens. Through these studies, we wish to learn more about the perceptions of the social community, of the citizens, of the general public. We've tried to do this based on opinion polls and questionnaires designed to identify the social acceptability factors for the sector. So we've been working on governments, but we've been basing a great part of our work on previous studies. I should like to make a few concluding remarks about the work conducted in WP7. Well, we can say that social acceptability is a new concept to address an old issue. That is to say, we have to take into account different governance processes. And also, social acceptability has to be a priority. This means that there are certain dimensions that haven't been considered in the past, or at least this consideration has been insufficient. We have to understand all of the perspectives of social acceptability in order to build efficient and effective communication strategies to improve this social acceptability. So it's necessary to promote institutional innovation, but this isn't enough, because it's vital to take into account this social acceptability. So therefore, we have to promote institutional innovation. Very often we have heard about promotion of technological advances and technological progresses, but not enough work has been conducted to date about how to improve or how to innovate the institutional part. We also have to do this from the private perspective, take into account, for example, corporate responsibility. We have to address this corporate responsibility based on good practices. We've seen this in different case studies. Regarding the institutional gaps, we've noticed, for example, a lack of correlation at different institutional levels, particularly at high level. And also we've noticed an institutional gap between the European, national, and local territorial levels. Very often the planning is based on technical approaches, but they don't take into account the needs of the territories and of the local communities. This leads to certain clashes and conflicts, which obviously has a negative repercussion on the social acceptability. So we have to take this into account in our decision-making process. You have 3 minutes, José. So as I was saying, there's a lack of stakeholder involvement because there's no transfer of skills from traditional territorial approaches. So we have to take into account the opinions of the stakeholders in the decision-making processes. And also we detected an absence of adapted institutional frameworks to address and manage social issues associated to institutional top-level decision-making, because very often decisions are solely based on technical issues. And so we've detected, once again, a reduced view of social aspects. So we've seen that in spite of the political and socio-cultural differences that we have observed in the case studies, we always come across the same questions, the same problems of social acceptability. It's vital to, it's been a real challenge to involve the stakeholders. And we've seen that social acceptability is not just a simple and not in my backyard or dichotomic issue, but we have to take into account which different projects are being proposed. This isn't something that's either black or white, But very often we come across the same issues, case after case. We have to adapt stakeholder involvement, and adaptive stakeholder involvement is a key issue. Well, I'll conclude with this last slide with a few general recommendations. It's absolutely vital to establish previous diagnosis through the analysis of local contexts. This is something that isn't done very often. We have to consider the local context, the local challenges that exist in the territories in order to avoid promoting projects that are developed ex nihilo, that is to say, without insights on local integration. It's very important to involve the stakeholders and the citizen at the right moment of the decision-making processes, instead of just focusing on information campaigns saying that aquaculture is wonderful. That's not enough. So it's very important, as I say, to involve the stakeholders and the citizens right from at the right moment of the decision-making process. We have to sincerity concerted actions rather than just the building processes of technical administrative consultation implemented when everything has already been decided. So we have to get the timing right. We have to plan very carefully. We have to take the time that we need for social dialogue. Social dialogue is vital, a very important question indeed. And also we have to abandon the projects that have no social support instead of insisting on maintaining them, because then the costs are going to be much greater in the long run. Well, these are general recommendations that we will be completing throughout the session this morning when we hear from the other presenters.
The screen.